Buffy the Last Vampire Slayer issue number 1 is written by Casey Gilly, with art by Joe Jarrow, colors by Joanna LaFuente, and letters by Ed Dukeshire. And the story begins with an older woman walking into a bar, who is none other than Buffy Summers, aka Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And it's in the middle of ordering her drink that her nose starts bleeding, which attracts vampires in the room, in which she is forced to run. And it's during this chase sequence that we see her run past this sign that talks about vampire human ethics in a workplace environment. Because before this story actually begins, way back up in the comic credits, just above, it lays out pretty much what's going on. Essentially, some dark magic occurred over the course of several years, and the sun sorta kinda dimmed or got blotted out a little bit, and so the vampires, they can just come out and frolic whenever they please. And somewhere during this time frame, vampires and humans decided, hey, let's chit-chat a little bit, see if we can reach some kind of mutual consensus here where we can both live, peacefully. Even though it's clearly established in Buffy lore that vampires have no souls and are just vehemently evil unless their souls are stuffed back into their bodies. Oh, and the book does clearly state this is also an alternate timeline. So in a way, this book kind of feels like a mix between the story Noctera and a Buffy version of Old Man Logan. After some swift movements, she manages to get away and into her home where she has a conversation with Giles, but oddly enough, we cannot hear him when it's revealed that he is in fact dead. Which we don't know how exactly. The dialogue makes it kind of sound like he died of old age, but given that we're in this post-sun type of world where vampires are running rampant, that it is possible he could have died in there as well before that treaty had been reached between humans and vampires. We then transition to sometime in the past where a woman has assembled a team of slayers to be ready should the vampires ever decide to break the treaty. And in the audience is Buffy, Xander, Cordelia, and Anya. Just then, a slew of creatures show up, and one of them detonates a bomb, killing almost everyone inside, including Buffy's friends. So along with Giles, pretty much most of the original characters are now dead. Boy, this book's gonna be joyful. Buffy then awakens from this terrible nightmare and punches a wall where she receives text messages from someone named Hellbeast. We're then treated to several pages of their conversation before we cut to a page with some witches casting some kind of spell on Buffy. It's then we return to Buffy, who's sparring with Anya, who not only survived the explosion, but who is in her demon form. And it's definitely moments like this that make me wonder, okay, I get we're in an alternate timeline, but how alternate are we? Like, where exactly does the canon of this show specifically cut off? Because there's definitely some things I noticed. For one, Anya being in her demon form is interesting because, at first she was a demon, then she became human, then she became a demon again, then she became human again, then she died in the Buffy finale. Also in the flashback sequence, Xander didn't have his eye patch on, so that took place in the final season as well. And as well, Cordelia was in that flashback sequence, but she died during season 5 of Angel. You also could kind of argue season 4, but she was more comatose than anything else. Call it nitpicky, but I think giving a definitive cutoff for when the canonical Buffy series ends in this universe would help ease the story a little bit. After the session ends, we discover the reason for this is to let Buffy cut loose against a demon because her powers are changing in ways she can't explain. For one, she's healing faster, and turns out is immortal. And part of the theory is the supernatural powers that make Buffy a Slayer is building up and needs to be released during a fight against a demon. This conversation continues into lunch where Buffy heads to the restroom to see her wound from punching a wall has completely healed. It's then she meets a woman who is known as a registered donor, which is explained as a person who willingly lets vampires feed on them in exchange for money. Essentially, a blood prostitute. But this is also completely legal, it has a card and everything. To which Buffy's reaction is, well, isn't that dumb? Suddenly, we cut to a vampire approaching a teen girl wanting to feed on her, but she says that she is not a donor and is actually too young to even be one. She ends up screaming, which draws Buffy to her. And I gotta say, between this and the opening scene, this world that's being constructed, these vampires seem really eager and willing to break this treaty at a moment's notice whenever they get a little rumbly in the tumblies. Because again, vampires do not have souls unless one is put into them. They are just plain evil, so it is kind of interesting that they would go along with the treaty in the first place and not just use, all of their supernatural abilities to just take over humanity because the sun's no longer a factor. And it's kind of like it's illegal to dust a vampire. You're not even allowed to carry a stake or anything that can be harmful to a vampire. But if a vampire chases somebody whose nose starts bleeding or is just waiting at the bus stop, that doesn't seem to garner much of a reaction, because what's trying to be presented as a mutual agreement between the two parties seems to be more like a vampire hierarchy. So just what are the rules here? And also, how does it work with the other demons? Because some do eat babies. But regardless, this woman is no regular victim and punches the vamp in the stomach to the point he almost pukes, and then he skitters off. The girl begins following Buffy, where the two eventually end up in a park where she reveals that she's not only a potential slayer, but also the daughter of Willow and Tara, which is where this issue ends. And again, where does the original timeline end and this new one pick up? Because much like Anya and some other characters, Tara is a character that died back in like season 6. And that really seems to be the biggest issue with this particular comic, is there's a lack of explanation in places that really need it. Because in terms of a first issue, this should be the book where all of the rules are basically present and set. This is where we should be getting all of our information, seeing where our characters are at, laying out the rules of the do's and don'ts of this new world. Because not just on a character basis of our original characters or anything like that, we're also concerning with the slayers. Just in terms of Buffy being the last vampire slayer is quite interesting, because at the time she was the only vampire slayer, but then after she died, another one was called, and we eventually got the whole season 8 thing where they used this weapon and a spell to make all potentials a slayer. And then even if you got rid of all of them, there are subsequent generations where other potential slayers could be born, and it's just a thing where you kill one, another pops up, or slayers just keep getting born. And I'm just kind of going around in circles here, because even at one point in the issue, Anya does talk to Buffy saying that, oh, her powers were dormant for a while, and it's like, well, what caused that? Well, why aren't we talking about this particular bit? To a degree, it almost really comes across like we are like just stab in the middle of a story and we miss those first few issues. Also, if you're going to introduce a slayer or potential slayer at the end of this particular book, then by default Buffy would not be the last vampire slayer. She would just be the last trained vampire slayer. But even so, if Willow and Tara are her parents, that would mean that she did receive some kind of training because she knew how to punch a vampire. Therefore, she could kill a vampire and knows how to fight, and therefore is also a vampire slayer. But if there's one positive that I could give this book, I actually did kind of like the art here. I think the use of colors between the present as well as the dream/past sequences are pretty good uses of color. But overall, if you're a huge Buffy fan, you will probably have to ignore pretty much all of the lore and history surrounding these characters and the show to hopefully get some enjoyment out of this book. Because on the surface, while it's a really solid premise, the minute you start digging into it, it is quite messy. And with that, I'm going to score Buffy the Last Vampire Slayer issue number 1 a 3 out of 10, which is sad because I was actually looking forward to this book. So Buffy the Last Vampire Slayer issue number 1. What did you think about this book if you've read it? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave your comments in the comment section below. And if you liked this video, I'd love it if you'd smash that like button, share it with some friends, subscribe if you're not subscribed already, and ring that notification bell for more comic book content. And if you're wondering what to watch next, consider one of these 2 videos. Alright, take care, have a great day, and as always, stay geeky.